Percentages, converting from fractions and decimals using number chips. This is the summer version, so it's summer themed, and it's a digital lesson. It's a lot of fun for the students. They can move these number chips around their screen in order to solve these problems. So the first slide with the lesson teaches what a percentage is. And a percentage is a comparison out of 100. So 45% means 45 out of 100. And here it shows some very basic conversions. So we've got the decimal, if read correctly, is 56 hundredths, which is the same as the fraction 56 100ths. So 56 100ths is 56%. It's a comparison out of 100. This is 73 hundredths or 73%, 12 hundredths or 12%, and then 1 whole is going to be 100 out of 100 or a 100%. So the next slide, students are going to be moving the number chips around their screen. Now every slide has every number that the students need. So as these get more difficult, and they get toward the end of a slide and the numbers aren't working, they know they've made an error somewhere and they need to go back and check. So in that way it's self-checking. So this first slide is pretty easy for the students. They get some practice moving the number chips and they just click and hold on the edge and then move them into place. So 12 hundredths is 12%, 59 hundredths is 59%, and so on. Now the next slide shows another way to convert a decimal to a percentage is to move the decimal point 2 places to the right. So here with 62 hundredths, if we move the decimal point 2 places to the right, we get 62%. Here we get 59%, 174%, and they need to know that if there's no number here in the hundredths place, they need to add a 0. So this is not 3%, it's 30%. So on the next slide, students have to be a little bit careful with these. This one would be 65%. And this one, if they move the decimal point 2 places to the right, they get 6.5%. This one, they have to add a 0, so this is 70%. And this one would be 7%, and so on. Now to convert a fraction to a percentage, they first want to change that fraction to a decimal. So the first method for doing this is to convert their fraction to an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator. That means it's going to be an equivalent fraction. And in order to do that, so that it's equivalent, they have to do the same thing to the numerator they do to the denominator. So they need to multiply by 5 to get 100 in the denominator. That means they're also going to multiply the numerator times 5. And they get 45 hundredths, which is written this way as a decimal, which is 45%. Same thing here. We're going to multiply numerator and denominator by 2 in order to get 100 in the denominator. So the next slide, students are going to practice that. So they're going to practice that on the next 3 slides, I believe, yes. Now they're converting these fractions to equivalent fractions with 100 in the denominator. So they know that this has to be 100. And they also know that they have to multiply times 5. So if they multiply numerator and denominator by 5, they're going to get 30 hundredths. As a decimal, that would be decimal point 30, 30 hundredths, which would be 30%. And they're going to do the same thing on this one. Again, we want our denominator to be 100, so we have to multiply by 2 in this case, and we get 82 hundredths, and so on. They're going to do the same thing on the next slide. Just change their denominator to 100. Same thing here. Now sometimes we can't directly change our denominator to 100. So we may have to simplify first. So here we have a fraction of 18/40. If we simplify by dividing the numerator and denominator by 2, we get 9/20. Now we have a number that we can convert to 100. So now we're going to multiply the numerator and denominator by 5, and we get 45 hundredths. 45 hundredths as a decimal, which is 45%. So again here, we want to simplify first. So they're going to be doing this on the next 2 slides. If we simplify here and we divide numerator and denominator by 3, we get 2/5. And it doesn't matter what color. Now we can change it to an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator by multiplying by 20. So 2 times 20 would be 40. 40 hundredths as a decimal, and that would be also 40%. So again, simplify first, and then convert to an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator. Same thing on the next slide. Now, not all fractions can be converted to equivalent fractions with 100 in the denominator. For example, 5/8. So the only way to convert it to a decimal then, except using a calculator, would be to use long division. So here we have 5/8, or 5 divided by 8. And you can see the division. We end up with a decimal of 625 thousandths. And we move the decimal point 2 places to the right, and we get 62.5%. Now the next slide, most of the division is done for them on this slide. They're just going to fill in these numbers, and they have also a movable decimal point to place in their answer. So 8 goes into 10 one time, which give us 8. We subtract, we get 2, we bring down a 0. 8 goes into 20 2 times. 8 times 2 is 16, subtract, you get 4, bring down a 0, and then 8 goes evenly into 40. So now we have a decimal answer. We're going to convert that to a percentage by moving the decimal point 2 places to the right. That will give us 12. And then we're going to move that decimal point here, 12.5%. Now the very last slide, students are going to be doing all of the division themselves. Again, they have every number they need, and make sure that they move that decimal point into the correct place in their answer. So this is percentages lesson. It's summer themed. It's converting fractions and decimals to percentages using number chips.